Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar where we'll be discussing record keeping. Discussing. I was thinking of OSHA. Today we have Tiffany Hubbard with us from McCarter in English. Tiffany helps clients navigate through workplace legal requirements, particularly a lot of OSHA stuff, and she's a partner at McCarter in English. I am your host today, Delmarina López. I'm an attorney here at CBIA, and we're so excited to be talking with you all today. So thank you again for joining us, everyone. We're going to get right into it. We have a slideshow that we're going to present some information first, and then we'll get into Q&A. We have our Q&A open today, so just so you know, if you have questions throughout the session, the Q&A will be open. We'll be maintaining that. I'll keep an eye on that myself. And our chat option is also open, but the best way to get your questions is through the Q&A because I'll be closely monitoring that. The questions you can wait until the end to ask questions, or you can just ask them as we go. Tiffany does not mind being interrupted. I do not mind being interrupted. So feel free to throw those in the Q&A and I'll interject with the questions as the flow of today goes. So we'll get started with the presentation. Tiffany, over to you.
Thanks, Delmarina. And for those of you that joined in the last 30 seconds or so, again, what we're going to be talking about today is OSHA's illness and injury record keeping requirements, part 1904. And I know, again, you can see us. I hope you can hear us. If you can't hear us, okay, please let us know. Put something in the chat and we'll try and adjust our volume. But I think what I would really like to know, for those of you who are here, how many of you have responsibility for OSHA recording and reporting requirements for your company? If you can go ahead and put that in the chat. Okay, I'm getting lots of I do's. So again, so what we're going to do is just kind of, we're going to start off with an overview. We're not going to assume that everybody here who has joined us knows all the ins and outs of injury and illness recording and reporting. Again, we're going to be focusing on that part 1904, if you will. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so here, what I've hopefully provided for you is something that you're going to find to be an easy to follow decision tree. So again, I think before you go recording things on the OSHA 300 log, okay, somebody got hurt, I'm putting it down. We want to back up first and see, okay, does it fall within the scope of the recording requirements? Or does my company qualify for a partial exemption? And so just to kind of walk through those, we're going to start off with company-wide. And again, this is the whole entire company. We're not looking at just one location for a company, but company-wide. Did the company have fewer than 10 employees during the prior calendar year? Okay, and if the answer is yes, you're not done yet. But you have to ask the question, okay, did OSHA or the Bureau of Labor Statistics notify the company that it must record injuries and illnesses? Okay, and if the answer to that question is no, nobody notified us and said our company needs to be recording, then you have no obligation to record injuries and illnesses. Okay, if you have, the number is like there's only 8 employees in the company for the prior calendar year, and then you would answer yes, yes. Did OSHA or BLS notify the company it must record injuries and illnesses? And if you did receive that notification, then you must do the recording. Okay. And again, if the company is larger than 10 employees, that doesn't mean there isn't possibly a partial exemption for you. It just means it's not going to be that company-wide size partial exemption. Okay, so the next one to look for, and this one is going to be establishment specific, and is the establishment in a specific industry group that is partially exempt? And again, normally if we were in a room together, I'd be asking people some questions about that, but what I want to refer you to is non-mandatory Appendix A to subpart B of Part 1904, and that is the list of partially exempt industries that OSHA has established. Is everybody familiar with the NAICS code or the North American Industry Classification System codes? And again, I know I'm asking questions, and if somebody wants to put something in the chat to let me know you guys are following along, that's great.
I think you could just
Okay.
explain that a little bit.
Explain what a NAICS code is.
Mhm.
Okay, and so this is something that you can find at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right? Or sorry, the census, the North American Industry Classification System codes. Okay, so you'll hear people often refer to NAICS. There's a 4-digit NAICS code. There's also subcodes under that are more specific. But if you go into that Appendix A, the non-mandatory Appendix A to Subpart B of Part 1904, and again, Subpart B refers to the scope of the rule, okay? It lists the partially exempt industries, for example, electronics and appliance stores, clothing stores, florists, full service restaurants, data processing, hosting, and related services. And again, so this is something where if you find your industry, the establishment's industry on the list, if it's partially exempt, you're then going to determine, okay, did OSHA or BLS ask us to keep records? And if they did, then you must keep them. But if they didn't, then you don't have an obligation to record illnesses or injuries for that establishment, right? Because it was listed on that partially exempt list. I see that we have a question in the Q&A, Delmarina.
No, it was just a response saying yes.
Oh, okay. See, I didn't click in. And then, if it is not on that list, then you have to record injuries and illnesses for the establishment. But again, that is not going to be necessarily for everybody who's at the work site and for every particular injury. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay. So the first question now, well, the next question is going to be, is this a covered employee? So if you're going to look towards, okay, who is it that we have an obligation as an employer to record for? And it's going to be all employees on the employer's payroll. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's labor, executive, exempt, non-exempt, part-time, seasonal, or migrant employees. If they're on the payroll, and they're injured, you're looking to, okay, this may be something that we need to record on our OSHA 300 log. And I know I have not mentioned OSHA 300 log yet. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But you also want to be mindful of employees that are not on the payroll, but are supervised on a day-to-day basis, okay, by you as an employer. And again, this one gets a little bit more nuanced. We're looking at contract employees that are performing maintenance or repair, turnaround, major renovation, or specialty work on or adjacent to a process area subject to 1910.119. Again, I don't expect everybody to have the standards memorized, but that's the process safety management of highly hazardous chemicals. And that one, again, does not require you to have the day-to-day supervision of those contract employees. Okay, so that's another special set. Okay, and again, it does not for who's not an employee for purposes of injury, illness, record-keeping purposes, contractors that aren't supervised by the employer, family members who are working on a family farm, unpaid volunteers or interns, domestic workers in residences.
And so we have a question in the chat regarding that. Would an employer log a temporary staffing that is under a staffing agency?
Okay, so I think it's a great question, and I think that brings us right back to that second sub-bullet point when you're talking about employees not on the payroll, but supervised by the employer on a day-to-day basis. So if this is a situation where the company is, as an employer, you're supervising the day-to-day work of those temp employees, you're going to be putting them on your logs if that is a recordable injury or illness. If it's something where the temp agency actually has supervisory employees who are on site providing that supervision, they're going to be the one recording those on their log. Again, it's going to be fact specific for that.
And then also going back to what you were previously speaking about, someone's asking if they can assume that partially exempt is low risk.
Partially exempt industries.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is something where OSHA has determined that, these are partially exempt. They don't have to do the recording. Either it's lower risk, right? It's considered to be a lower risk industry. But it's not something where you can say we think we fall under it, right? You're looking at that list to show that you qualify for it.
Right. Just because it seems like it's low risk doesn't mean that OSHA feels like it's low risk and it should be partially exempt. So always go back
Right.
to the list.
Right. And again, for those of you who don't, it is important to get to know these regulations and read through them. I am not going to be reading through them word for word for you today because the goal of this was not to provide an afternoon nap for everybody, but to really kind of help you get familiarized with it, go over questions that, you may have, confusion points that you may have, just an understanding of making these determinations. And again, it's important going into those regulations, you will find answers to a lot of those questions. Or it may be a situation where you end up calling Delmarina or myself or another attorney saying, okay, here's the scenario. I don't feel like it fits in neatly to any of the buckets that, I'm familiar with. I need to talk through it. And again, that's not an unheard of thing, right? Again, very fact specific. But if there's no questions on covered employees, we'll just go on to the next slide.
Yep, I think we're good to go on to the next.
Okay. And so this brings us, again, we're kind of stepping through this recordable injury or illness. So again, do we have an employee injury or illness is the first question. I know that sounds very, very basic. Obviously, this, is what likely triggered you starting to say, okay, is this something I need to record in my OSHA 300 log? If somebody isn't injured or it doesn't have an illness, then you don't have to think anymore on it. There's nothing to record. If you have yes, the next question is it work related? Okay. And here, looking at the work relatedness, it is, I just want to make sure I'm giving you the right citation here. We're looking at 29 CFR 1904.5, determination of work relatedness. Okay, so the first thing to consider is this injury or illness work related? The event or exposure in the work environment either caused or contributed to the resulting condition or significantly aggravated a pre-existing injury or illness. And again, I think it's important to emphasize here that there is a geographic presumption. Okay, so the work relatedness is presumed for injuries or illnesses resulting from events or exposures occurring in the work environment unless an exception applies. And those exceptions are listed in 1904.5B2. Okay. So again, it's going to be going through looking to see if it's work related. We know we have somebody who was injured, you know, at work, and then it's running through that list of does it fall under a specific a, a specific exception to that assumption that it happened at work, therefore it's work related, right? Or it happened in the work environment, if you will. So, okay, thank you, Delmarina. So she has sent everybody a link. And so again, I don't want to go through, okay. Under what circumstance can a previously recordable incident can be reclassified as non-recordable? Okay, we're going to hold that question for now as we kind of slowly walk through this chart, but we can talk about what happens when you've come by and realized, oh, you have new information that says this takes it out of the work-related determination. Okay. So some of the examples in this table, again, taking it out of that presumption that it's work-related. At the time of the injury or illness, the employee was present in the work environment as a member of the general public rather than as an employee. Okay. Another one is the injury or illness is caused by a motor vehicle accident and occurs on a company parking lot or a company access road while the employee is commuting to or from work. Okay, so they're in their commute still, they're not at work. the injury or illness is solely the result of personal grooming, self-medication for a non-work related condition, or is intentionally self-inflicted. So those are just some of the examples. Again, there's a longer list in this table, but I would again suggest that as you're going through that, particularly if this is new to you, although I will say it is a handy thing you want to go back through. You don't want to just rely on memory and find out that, oh, I misremembered this. I was confusing the reportable with the recordable. Okay. So let's say we've determined, yes, this is a work-related injury. Then the next question, is it a new case? Okay. And if it isn't, if this is no, this is an old injury, then you're looking at, okay, did we previously record it? And if so, do we need to update the previous record that we did? Say it was an injury that happened in the prior year. If it is a new case, then the next question is, does it meet the recording criteria or specific case recording criteria? And so that takes us into 1904.7 is the general recording criteria. Okay. And it talks about that you must consider an injury or illness to meet the general recording criteria and therefore to be recordable if it results in any of the following: death, days away from work, restricted work or transfer to another job, medical treatment beyond first aid, or loss of consciousness. Okay. And so that is the first part of going through this decision and understanding. And again, this is not something where you take what is, my personal interpretation of first aid. The regulations actually have a provision on this that talks about what is first aid for the purposes of Part 1904. Okay. I'm not going to read you the whole definition, but again, it talks about, use of non-prescription medication at non-prescription strength. It talks about other types of things that are going to pull it out, like administering tetanus immunizations considered first aid, but other immunizations, such as if you're doing like hepatitis B or rabies vaccine post-exposure, right? Those are going to be considered medical treatment, not first aid. And again, it kind of goes through and talks, it lists out all the different things. And then there's actually a question in here. It says, any other procedures included in first aid? And at the end of this list, it says, no, this is a complete list of all treatments considered first aid for Part 1904 purposes. So again, something to run through and say, okay, looks like we have something that went beyond first aid for this, again, and making that determination. And so I know we talked about the things that make that makes it something that is recordable. There's also a significant diagnosed injury or illness that is recordable. Okay, so that's another thing to keep in mind when you're looking at this. So it can be something that a physician or another healthcare provider has diagnosed that would become reportable. And again, work-related cases involving cancer, chronic irreversible disease, a fractured or cracked bone, or a punctured eardrum must always be recorded under the general criteria, the time of diagnosis by a physician or other healthcare professional. So again, I know I'm spending a lot of time walking you through this decision tree. But again, once you've gotten to that, yes, it meets the recording criteria, then the answer is yes, you record. And if you don't meet all three of those, that it's work related, it's a new case, and it meets the recording criteria or specific cases, then the answer is no, you don't record. Okay, so thank you for bearing with me going through that. I now want to talk about reportable injuries. So if we could go to the next slide. Oh, if we could actually go back one. Okay. And so we're looking at a reportable work-related employee fatality. And so again, this is just a decision tree that I put together to hopefully make this a very clear, understandable thing for you to follow. So, okay, we have an employee fatality. First determination, is it work-related? Yes or no? Okay. If it's not, you don't report. If it's a yes, the next question is, did it occur within 30 days of that work-related incident? If it occurred 31 days later, you don't report. It has to have occurred within 30 days of that work-related incident. And again, I don't want to bring us back to talking about all things COVID, but this is one thing where it had actually, OSHA had issued FAQs and talked about make sure that you're reporting these, but oftentimes the time frame from when somebody was actually had, say, acquired COVID at work, a work-related illness, it was longer than 30 days before there was a fatality and it was not reportable. Okay, so if it occurred within 30 days, no, you don't report, but you do record if you're required to keep injury and illness logs. And so again, I just want to circle back to what we were talking about at the beginning here about those partial exemptions from Part 1904 record keeping requirements. So again, that is if you meet that, my company is smaller than 10 employees in the last calendar year, or an establishment falls under that Appendix A list of industries, right? Where I don't have to record. It doesn't mean I'm exempt from reporting, okay? All employers that are covered by OSHA are required to report employee fatalities. And that has to be reported within 8 hours. Okay. And so if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay. So reportable employee injury. We're looking at inpatient hospitalizations. Okay, and that's where somebody's getting treatment, not just for observation, amputation, or loss of an eye. And then the question is it work related? Obviously, if it's not work related, you're not going to report it. If it is work related, the next question is, did it occur within 24 hours of the work related incident? So again, going down the path of no, if you're looking at a situation where somebody had a crush injury and they had 3 toes amputated, but it wasn't until 72 hours later, that's not a reportable, right? It is an amputation and you're going to record it, but it's not reportable because it didn't fall within that 24 hours. So if it occurred within the 24 hours, you're looking at reporting that to OSHA. And again, I want to make sure most of you, I think, indicated that you are involved in doing the recording and reporting for your workplaces. But if we can go to the next slide, and we are sharing these slides afterward. Is that correct,
Yes.
Delmarina?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay.
Before we move on to how to report, we have a question about the difference between recordable and reportable as far as documentation and forms.
Okay. So as far as like what is recordable, okay. So that
Or
is
what's the difference, rather, right? Like, what does
what's
recordable mean and what does reportable mean?
okay. So again, that recordable, that's a really good question. So I think I mentioned the OSHA 300 log earlier. And again, I don't want to presume that everybody here is fully familiar with all of the OSHA forms, but the OSHA 300 log is a summary form that you're completing throughout the year, um, listing when you have a recordable work related injury or illness. It goes on that OSHA 300 log, okay? And you have to update that. It's not a one and done. You're gonna have to update it. And then the 301 is the incident, more details about the actual incident that happened, if that makes sense. And again, that is the recording requirement, right? There's also an annual summary recording requirement. That's your 300A log, if you will. And then there is reporting. And so there are certain things, such as the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputations, and loss of an eye, that OSHA says, yeah, they're recordable, but we really want to know about them, regardless of where they happen. So if they happened in a small employer that has that partial exemption from recording, we still need you to report it. We want to know about it. We may look into this further. And it's the same thing for an establishment. You have an establishment, say a full service restaurant, right? Falls under that partial exemption. You're not keeping that OSHA 300 log. You're not filling out the OSHA 301 when the incident happens. And you're not doing that annual summary. But if you have a situation that is a work-related fatality or one of those 3 that we talked about for the injuries being reported, you have to go through the reporting requirements. And what you're seeing on the screen now, are the different ways to report to OSHA. This is not sending an email to the compliance officer that, had come out for an inspection a couple years ago. This is, you want to go notify by phone or in person to the nearest OSHA area office. And again, I know some of you may be at companies that have locations in multiple states, but I'm focusing here on Connecticut. And so what I've given you is the contact information for the Bridgeport and Hartford area offices. So here in Connecticut, you can do this by phone or in person. You can also use OSHA's toll-free central number. You can also go to their reporting application at osha.gov. Okay, I've given you a QR code for those that prefer QR codes. That one currently will take you right to the serious event reporting online form.
And so the general big difference, right, between recordable and reportable. So all reportable injuries are still recordable. You still have to record them, but it's about OSHA wanting to essentially like be on site. If there's a fatality, they want to react as soon as possible, assess whatever is happening, whatever safety measures need to be mitigated so that there isn't further injury. So that's the reportable side, but not everything that's reportable, but everything that is reportable is recordable. And I
Right.
know that was like alphabet soup, but it makes sense.
Well, and just to clarify on that, it is recordable, but you may be exempt under that partial exemption from having to actually record it. Okay, so that really is more of yes, it doesn't make it a non-recordable event. It's just you're not required to keep those records. Okay. So again, trying to make sure we're not making your head spin and hopefully not going so slow that you're falling asleep on us. So,
What do you mean? This is the most exciting topic people will talk about all week.
it is, again, I think it is something that it becomes confusing if you don't think of them as two different obligations that you have for work-related injuries and illnesses. Again, there's the recording component, which you have to determine for each establishment. And sometimes people will ask, well, how do I know what an establishment is? Right? And so that's something, again, it's in the definitions, actually, in the regulations towards the end. And again, I'm not going to pull it up and read it to you because again, I'd be turning my head to my other screen. I don't want to look like I'm ignoring everybody. But it is something that, again, it's typically what you would expect. Like, this is our Hartford location. This is our, Bridgeport office, or, there are some cases where somebody might have one physical location that's two establishments, but you'd want to read through that definition. It's a very unusual scenario. It's usually when it's like one employer, but they're two separate companies. But oftentimes you're looking at each establishment, and that is something where, you're recording those injuries and illnesses for the establishment. And I don't know, I haven't seen a question prop up here, but there is an exception for temporary establishments. So if it's something that you don't anticipate to be there for longer than a year, right, you can keep them on an OSHA log for those establishments or work sites, if you will. So if you have those where look, this is going to be a 3-month location, you can that doesn't have to have its own. It can be on a list for all of your temporary establishments or temporary.
I think
Does that
this
make
is a
sense?
great moment to play our favorite game, which is it recordable? Is it reportable? So I'm going to go through some scenarios and we're just going to fire them off at Tiffany, and Tiffany will talk about whether something is recordable and what potential OSHA citations and references would apply. Again, the Q&A is open, so if you have your own scenario or questions, feel free to throw it in there and I'll throw it into my own scenario game here. So let's talk about a warehouse lunchroom injury, right? Let's say this employee, his name is George, he's a forklift driver. And George works in a large company's warehouse as a forklift driver. During his lunch break, he used the employee's kitchen to make himself a sandwich with ingredients he brought from home. He accidentally cuts the palm of his hand while cutting a bagel for his sandwich. The cut was deep enough to require a trip to urgent care for stitches and a tetanus shot. Is that recordable?
No.
Why
And
not?
so, no, so I think that that's a really, it's not that helpful if it's just we play this, we just answer the question and move on. I think we want to kind of walk through that, and I'm not going to ask that we back up to the decision tree there. But you told some important information at the beginning, right? So this is a forklift driver, right? Forklift operator who's working at a large company's warehouse. So that tells me large company is over 10 employees. Although I suppose we could always double check. Some people may think it's large. But that tells me that they don't qualify for that partial exemption. And so the next question is, okay, warehouse, the warehouse, and there's a forklift in the warehouse. I don't think that we're going to see that this is going to be an exempt industry, right, for that partial exemption for the establishment. But then you talked about this is activity he's doing. It is in the employer's kitchen, but it's his lunch break and he's preparing food for himself and he cut himself. And so based on that, no, it's not. It's not work related. And again, for those that are curious and want the citation, it's 29 CFR 1904.5B2 Romanet 4. And pardon me while I just turn my head to read this for you. It is the injury or illness is solely the result of an employee eating, drinking, or preparing food or drink for personal consumption, whether bought on the employer's premises or brought in. For example, if the employee is injured by choking on a sandwich while in the employee's establishment, the case would not be considered work-related. That same section of the table where it takes you out of that geographic presumption of work-related, it does note that if the employee is made ill by ingesting food contaminated by workplace contaminants, such as lead, or gets food poisoning from the food supplied by the employer, the case would be considered work-related. So I know that was a long answer to your question, Delmarina, but was that helpful?
Yes. And then also, so let's change it a little bit. So let's say he's not a forklift driver anymore. He's a chef. And he cuts himself while cutting a bagel for a sandwich that's not for him, but for the actual breakfast service or for the lunch service at his employer. The cut was still deep enough, and now it requires surgery. So even though he was released from the hospital that same day, is it recordable?
Is it recordable?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It depends. So full service restaurants, which it sounds like he's a chef at a full service restaurant, the NAICS code for that is 7221. And again, I don't have all these memorized. We prepared this for you. But if you go to that Appendix A to Subpart B, right, of the section, it's one of the industries that's listed as for that partial exemption for recording. So employers not required to keep OSHA injury and illness records for any establishment listed on the partially exempt industry list, unless, of course, they received a notification from OSHA or BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, saying, we're putting you on notice. We want you to record your injuries and illnesses this year. Okay, was that helpful?
Yes. So although it was work related, it still did not require for it to be reported. It's not a reportable event.
It's not recordable because of the partial exemption.
And
Right.
which it's also not reportable because it's not one of the reportable types of injuries.
Right. And I think if we want to just kind of step through that a little bit, because again, I know that it can take some time to get that recordable and reportable separate in your mind. Again, when we look at this, it's not a fatality. It wasn't an inpatient hospitalization. There was surgery, but he was discharged the same day. And no amputation. This was the palm of his hand. You didn't indicate. I mean, I suppose, if you say, wait, but they had to amputate the pinky because circulation didn't come back, we'd be talking about a different scenario. What was the timing of that?
No, George got to keep his digits in this scenario.
Yes, exactly. So I think what it is, not a loss of an eye. So it was work related. But did not result in a reportable injury.
Okay. That was one employer. Now we're moving to another company, and Stephanie here is an accountant. She works for a large manufacturing company and performs her duties from her home office 3 days a week. She called HR to report that she tripped over her dog. He's a Labradoodle, very important fact there, while rushing back to her home office to answer a work call. Is her injury recordable?
No, it is not. And so again,
Even
this
if she
is
was trying to answer a work call?
No, and so again, because she tripped over her dog, right? Going to do that. And again, this is actually one of the examples that OSHA uses in its regulations. Um, and again, it is for those that want the direct site, and I have seen a couple people posting in links to the regulations in the chat, which is helpful. Again, if you look at the last subparagraph, 1904.5B7, it talks about making a determination of whether an injury is work-related in an employee's home. And the example there is this example, except no mention of the Labradoodle. Okay.
What if, let's just switch it up, right? And this was not prepared, but what if she's in the office that day and she trips over one of her coworkers who's like on the floor grabbing something?
When she was just in the workplace, again, you have that geographic presumption, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is not gonna, I don't see that one in the table. But
Mm-hmm.
again, it's a good thing to go through again and read through it and say, yep, nope, that's a situation that had happened because she was at work and it was work related.
What if she trips over her own lunchbox while at work in the office?
Um, well, I think I want to back up to the last question you asked me because we didn't ask how significantly she was injured. Did it
Right.
require more than first aid?
Right.
Right. And if it did not, and she tripped over the dog and she was not injured, like there wasn't an injury that required more than first aid, it still wouldn't be recordable. So
Mm-hmm.
taking that into the workplace context with the coworker, what was the extent of her injury?
Let's say she threw her back out and she is now out of work for a week.
So that's going to be recordable. Days away from work.
Well, let's say she threw her back out, but it was tripping over her own lunchbox while at the office.
So personal and related to her own, like, was she getting her lunch? Again, I think that I would, be the lawyer there and I would want more information to see what the whole scenario was that was happening, to make sure we fully understood it before we said that it wasn't recordable.
And the purpose of this exercise is understanding that like one small tweak in the facts could change absolutely everything. So if it's not clear cut, I keep giving her some that are less clear cut because I wanted her to get to that point where she said it depends, right? Like the lawyerly answer. But it does depend sometimes. And in those scenarios, you should not try to figure that out on your own. You should probably call either CBIA or call Tiffany so that we can help you walk through that because it's not as clear cut as there's always a yes or no answer. There's fact finding that's required with these. All right, we have another question in the chat. So someone said that OSHA sent them a notice. We're deviating a little bit from our game to answer this question here. OSHA sent them
Okay.
a notice letting them know that their files are going to be audited for 2025 sometime in 2026. How much info should they keep in their files for the OSHA audit? Doctor's notes, workers' comp reports, or just the OSHA forms?
Well, I think you said that they're going to be audited. Did
Mm-hmm.
it say that they're going to it's their Part 1904 records? Is this their exposure records, medical records of employees?
That was not a detail that was provided. So maybe
Okay, I
that's
think
something
that
that can
that's
be
going to be
provided.
helpful, right? I think that this is you want to make sure you want to review your records and make sure that they're current, and complete and accurate. Again, I know we didn't talk about retentions. I don't know if you want to take a moment now that we can just kind of talk about, the timings of these obligations
Mhm.
and
We
how long you're
can, but
required to
before
keep.
we go into that, we'll give them a second to provide more context on that question. Okay, they just did. It's the OSHA safety incident reports, just those.
Mm-hmm. So I think, and presumably you had a recording obligation and you've been completing those documents as you go, but you want to review them and make sure they're complete. Is there anything that you need to update, right? Are the days away from work, is somebody still out? And so those days away from work, right, you're recording them, those are calendar days. You don't count the day of the incident, but you start counting from there and it caps at 180 days. So reviewing that, making sure the information is complete and accurate. Another thing that we haven't touched upon yet that we did want to note about was talking about privacy concern cases. Okay. Depending on the type of injury, or if there's, the employee requests that their name be redacted, right? And that you have, again, you have to maintain a separate list with that. And I do confess, I do not memorize this. So bear with me as I just turn to read this for you. So there are situations where you don't record the employee's name for privacy reasons. And again, you want to review that and make sure that your records are compliant with that. You can't enter, the employee's name. So instead you would enter a privacy case. And that is, let's see, does this one not list them all? So we're looking at, an injury to the reproductive organs. Intimate body part, sexual assault, mental illness, HIV, hepatitis, or tuberculosis. No other specific infections are mentioned by OSHA. A needle stick or cut by a sharp object contaminated with another person's blood or potentially infectious material. Another injury or illness for which the employee independently and voluntarily requests that their name not be in the log. Okay. And that's where you want to be maintaining that separate confidential list of the case number and employee name so that you're able to update it. You don't want it to be to the point where you can't tell who it is and you're updating the wrong record later.
Right.
Okay.
Someone wants to play our game with us, a recordable game, and they're asking. So let's go back to George, right? The guy who's a chef. And let's say George is a chef, cuts himself with a bagel, but George only works Monday to Wednesday, and he got to go home from that surgery, but is technically supposed to be out of work for 3 days to recover from the surgery. But those are days that he's not technically scheduled to work. Is that still recordable?
Yes, because you're looking, well, again, let's assume, are we switching him to an industry or like where he's working at an establishment that
Let's
has
talk
to
about both,
record?
right? So let's keep him at an industry that has an exemption and then take him out of an industry with an exemption.
Okay, so assuming he's still in his full service restaurant, they're exempt from recording, right? So they don't have to do that recording. Okay, somebody's now said manufacturing. Okay, so he's
love
the
it. They're
chef
into
at
the
the
game.
manufacturer. Yeah, so what you're looking at is it's done on a calendar basis. So you would be recording that from, again, you don't count the day of the incident, you start counting the next calendar day, right? For what the physician has put them for days away from work.
So if they got her on Wednesday, went to get checked up after work. So let's say they went Thursday morning to get checked out, and then they were out of work for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but none of those days are days where they would have been at work. Is that still recordable?
So, okay. So how do I record a work-related injury or illness results in days away from when an injury or illness involves one or more days away from work, you must record the injury or illness on your OSHA 300 log with a check mark in the space for case involving days away and an entry of the number of calendar days away, okay, from work in the number of days column. If the employee is out for an extended period of time, you must estimate the number of days. Again, you begin counting the next day. And then when you're looking at this, you were counting it from calendar days. The days away must be recorded whether the injured or ill employee follows the physician or licensed care. That's not the answer to your question. Sorry, I'm trying to read this quickly. Okay. You're recording the calendar days away. Okay, I can pull it back up and I can follow up with that. We can circulate the citation for that. But it's also a variation on that is also what if, the physician says George needs to stay out for 5 days and George comes back the next day.
Right.
You're still going to count that as days away because that was what the physician advised for the situation. And on the flip side of that, if the physician says George is all patched up and can go back tomorrow, but George decides to stay out for a week, you're not counting that as days away from work. That is the physician said he was able to return.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, sorry to interrupt you. You can go back to your last thought before my questions.
That would require me to remember what they were. So why don't we go ahead? I think you had another scenario or two for us, unless somebody has,
Sure.
we're getting down to the last 12 or 15 minutes or so, if anybody has other questions. If not, we'll continue to play our recordable, reportable game.
I'm having fun doing it. All right, let's talk about Tom. Tom is a delivery driver for a construction supply company. While driving a company truck on a public freeway, he was involved in a traffic accident. The collision caused a fractured wrist that required medical treatment beyond first aid. Is that reportable?
That would be a recordable injury.
And it would have to be included in the OSHA 300 log.
Yes.
Okay. And then let's change it a little bit. Let's say he was on his route, but then he decided he needed to pick me up and he was going to get some coffee. So he actually deviated and went to go stop at the nearest coffee shop. We won't say a name for one because they're not sponsoring. So any coffee shop, a local coffee shop. And while he was in the coming out of the drive-through lane of that coffee shop, he gets into an accident. Let's say he sustained the same injury. It was a wrist injury. Is that recordable?
Okay, so I think I am going to go through and do that lawyer thing again and say I want to know a little bit more about the facts, like how much of a deviation was this? And is it something where we can say that he really was on a personal errand and that this was not part of the work related, what he was doing? Assuming that it is and it was completely separate, then I think you would say, no, this was not recordable. But
Right on the
again,
route, right? Like there's coffee shops right along the road. It was right there.
I think I would, again, once we gather all the facts, this one may be one where you err on the side of, you're going to record it and presume that it's work related, and that wasn't enough to take it out.
Right. And so let's add another layer to it. Let's say even if he did stop for coffee, let's say that collision at the end of the drive-through while he was getting right back onto his route ended in a fatality.
His
Would
fatality?
his fatality.
Okay.
His,
So
yes.
I don't mean to smile at that. I just was like looking for the distinction between was
Yes,
someone else killed
yes.
or was it him? I mean,
We
obviously
did not think you were being that
yeah,
silly.
no, this would be a tragic situation. But I think there, you'd be looking at it for because it's on a public road, public highway. OSHA does not consider that to be reportable unless, we're talking about a construction work site on those public roads, right? That would be an exception there where that is a little bit different. But here it sounds like he was not working on a construction site. He's a delivery driver who was on his way to make a delivery and he was killed in a car accident or right on the public highway. So that is something that's not reportable, but it would be recordable.
And I think that's a good distinction to make also, right? Like this was a fatality, but it's not reportable. And so if you find yourself in situations where it's questionable whether it's reportable, then you want to reach out to someone, right? Like you want to make sure you reach out to CBIA or to Tiffany at McCarter English or any attorney, right? That could help you figure that out because the last thing you want to do is have a reportable incident and then not report that. So don't make that distinction yourself if there's questions about it. All right, we're down to the last couple of minutes. I'm gonna look in the chat to see if there's any more questions from folks. Oh, here we go. There's another question going back to the first question about the audit.
Okay.
They're not sure if they heard the answer, so they just want you to go over it again if possible. If they're going to audit the OSHA incident reports for the year, should they only show them the OSHA forms or should they also have access to doctor's notes, workers' comp correspondence, etc.?
So I think this might be something where it's a better question to handle offline to talk about the specifics for this, because again, not knowing the full nature of what's involved here, that would be probably a better discussion to have offline. But I think there was an earlier question that we actually held while we were going through our decision tree,
Yes, there
right?
was.
And that one was one where,
Under what circumstance can a previously recordable incident be reclassified as non-recordable?
right. And I think there you're going back and you get additional information, right? So let's just use your Tom is driving on the highway, right? And you thought that he was right on the route when he went and got his coffee and got into the accident. And then you have subsequently learned that that wasn't the case. He actually was in, 3 towns over. He had decided to you know, I don't know. I can't come up with a great scenario off the top of my head for this one, but you learn additional information that shows that this was not work related. okay, where you previously had thought it was work related. Or where maybe there's a situation where an employee had said that they had received this injury at work, and then you have learned that actually no, it was something that happened to them over the weekend, right? And it was something that they went and were treated for before. And, it doesn't fall into a scenario where you're talking about, but it was aggravated at work, okay? Because that's another thing we could talk about where that would become something that would be work-related injury. So you have information that changes it from being work-related would be a reason um, to go back and strike it from the log.
Let's dive into that a little bit. So let's say an employee is injured outside of work, but then they come into work and whatever they did at work aggravates it. How does that change things in terms of recording and reporting?
Yeah, I'm sorry, the sound glitched on me there. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So let's dive into that scenario a little bit more where an employee is injured outside of work, but then something they do at work actually aggravates it, right? How do we handle that in terms of recording and reporting?
So I think you're gonna want to go back through that regulation and look at work related, right? And is this something that, no, this was just somebody's condition from outside of work, right? And regardless of whether they were at work, or was it something that was actually aggravated and made worse because of, moving boxes or something like that. Say it was a back injury and created further strain or slipped a disc, right? There may be things there. Again, that's going to be something that's going to be very fact specific to go through and to make that determination.
Thank you. So that's almost like the opposite of the question, right? Like instead of going from recordable to no longer recordable to actually this was initially not recordable, but it could potentially be.
And I think that there's a good point to bring up with, again, when we're talking about reporting, the reporting requirement, right? It's within 8 hours on a fatality, right? Upon learning of the fatality, work-related fatality, and it's within 24 hours of learning about an inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye. There again, it could be that there was a delay in the employer hearing about it. And so you want to make sure that as soon as the employer is on notice of it, that they're meeting that within 8 hours and 24-hour reporting obligation.
Yeah. So that was your thought before the last set of questions. It was about timing.
Oh,
Also
okay.
around timing, can we talk a little bit about forms and timing?
Yes, sure. So I think, like, again, going back to that OSHA 300 log, so this is for employers that have a recording obligation for one or more establishments, right? You got that 300 log you're filling out. There's often a question of how quickly do I have to record this? It has to be within 7 days. Okay. And another question is, do I have to produce it to OSHA if OSHA upon request, right? And that is yes, and it has to be within 4 business hours of the request. And then so the Form 301, same thing. It's within 7 business days. The 300A, which is the annual summary, that one is something that you're preparing after the calendar year has ended. Okay. And it's something that has to be posted by February 1st of the following calendar year. And it has to remain posted until April 30th. Okay. And then that's the annual summary. And I think sometimes there can be confusion when, OSHA comes and requests records and they ask for your, 300, your 301 and your 301, the 300, 300A for the last 3 years, right? If we are in November of the current calendar year, you haven't created your 300A yet. You're not creating that to respond to OSHA's request. You're going to give them what you have so far for the year, right? But you're not going to prepare that summary before the year is over.
Thank you. Okay, so we have just about 2 minutes left. If we have time for one final question, if there's any last minute burning questions. If we can move to the next slide, there's information on how to contact both myself and Tiffany. If you're a CBIA member, one of the member benefits that you get with your membership is access to myself and Diane McCrisky. We are both counsel at CBIA who can help you with your HR and safety related questions. My contact information, my direct line, and my email are in this next slide. Feel free to reach out if you have questions. We also work, and we're thankful for the support of McCarter and English Today and their partnership in today's webinar. So if you have questions around safety, Tiffany Hubbard is also a resource, and her contact information is also on the slide. Thank you again to all of you for joining us. We hope this was incredibly helpful. I know for us, we nerd out about these things. So for us, it's super, it's just a great topic for us because we eat, breathe, and sleep this. But for you all, this might not be something you eat, breathe, and sleep. So we hope that we were able to bring you some comfort in terms of record keeping. If you have ideas around other topics that you would love for us to cover at future webinars, please feel free to send them to me via email. This is for you. So if you have something else that you want to learn about, feel free to let us know. We do have another one coming up in the spring. You'll get more information on that as we get closer to that. But thank you again so much for joining us and for your attention and what we think is an interesting topic and we hope was also an interesting topic for you. Thank you, Tiffany, again for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And we'll leave that contact information up for about another minute because that's what we've got. But thank you again.